So I want to say a few things before getting into verse 26. So verse 16, if you look at verse 16, please display verse 16. So neither atom or form exists nor a sense organ elsewhere. Even more, sense organ as agent exists. So I talked about this morning, but it was not very clear. So I talked about this, what I said yesterday. So because this text has been translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan, therefore it's different to the texts that have been composed in Tibetan right from the beginning. And it has also to do with the translator. So sometimes the translation may be a little difficult. So it's difficult to understand this verse in particular. It's hard to, we can kind of explain it, but it's a little difficult. So what is really the intent of the author? It's important to understand what does the author mean. That being the case, now when we read this verse and look at the other verses above and below, so just in the context, it'll become clear that, as I said before, neither atom or form exists. So there's no partless atom when we have like the aggregation of phenomena. I mean, things coming together, but it's being an aggregation of many particles. There's no partless particle. But here saying there's no sense organ. So in the commentary on the 400 verses, for instance, it says that there's no aggregation. So it is said that. So Rinpoche reads this quote. So it's basically saying that it that these partless particles are not the object of the sense consciousness. And this quote is also given in the Lamrim Chamo as part of the special insight section. Now, the sense organs are also an aggregation of many atoms, but it's not possible that you have an aggregation of partless particles, partless atoms, that then serve as a sense organ. That doesn't work. So then when we speak of the external atoms, these external particles, that is impossible. Like there are no external partless particles, but also in terms of the internal form, such as the sense organ or the sense power. In that case, it's not possible that the particles that form this particular sense power are partless. So sometimes when we say power, sense power, this word power here is also often used as a creator God. So anyway, here it's not possible to have this kind of power, sense power, if it is formed of these subtle particles. At this point, actually, we are refuting, these verses refute the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantrika. On that basis, they say that when you look at the external world, the foundation are these partless atoms. Now, when it comes to the physical world, everything that forms, what is the building block of the external world? It's this partless atom. Then with regard to the self, or with regard to the person, what is the building block of the person? What is the fundamental building block of a person? It is a partless moment in time. So a shortest moment in time that can no longer be divided of consciousness. So the mind's shortest moment in time that can no longer be further divided. That is the building block, the fundamental building block of mind. So there you have the external and the internal fundamental building blocks according to these two Buddhist schools. And that's what the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantrika asserts. But that is not accepted by the other schools. So neither atom or form exists nor sense organ elsewhere. So with regard to atoms in particular, whether we talk about the external atoms or the internal atoms, it's impossible that they form these partless particles or these partless atoms form the external material world or the internal sense organs, for instance. So this so in this context also what is implied is that there's no creator God. Just as before we talked about no permanent self, there's no permanent self, therefore there's no permanent creator either. So anyway, this perfect, so the external, according to the non-Buddhist systems, they accept, for instance, a permanent self. That is impossible. But not just that. So not just that, it's well, being impossible because of cause and effect. The fact that an impermanent cause has to give a cause has to be impermanent to give rise to an effect and so forth. Therefore, we went through this. Rinpoche explained this before. This is not correct. That therefore, because it's impossible to have a permanent self, therefore also, well, if there were a permanent self, then cause and effect wouldn't make sense. And this has been refuted before, and then now following this, then what is refuted is the view of the two lower Buddhist philosophical schools. And from there, we move then on to the Cittamatra school. So these different schools, these different views are all refuted and they built on top of each other. So first you have the refuting the non-Buddhist system, and then you continue on. So with verse 16, it wasn't really that clear. It's a little difficult to explain it, but anyway, so seeing the different commentaries, I kind of remembered that there's not much explanation, so it's very difficult to find an explanation of, for instance, this verse, and there was very little time to get prepared. Anyway, so there is a commentary on this particular text, but so so there's this particular commentary. So, but this is very short. It's not that extensive. It doesn't explain, for instance, this verse number 16. And Rinpoche said it wasn't really clear to me what it means. It's difficult. And it still seems that in this text that there are some verses are missing. I still have that sense. I talked about it earlier that it's still, it seems a little odd. So that maybe there may have been a mistake. So this morning, anyway, I didn't get a sense it was very clear what I explained with regard to verse 16. I didn't explain that verse clearly. And then after class, someone asked me a question. So I would like to share this question with you because I think it's beneficial for all of you. So what was the question? So, and the author of this text, of this commentary of the awakening mind, why does he refute partless atoms? It's not necessary. Well, so even if one phenomenon, what is the kind of relationship to be more exact, what is the relationship between saying that there's no partless atoms and saying that three different beings have different appearances? That has to do with the imprints. How does that connect? What's the connection between the different appearances that sentient beings have and the refutation of partless particles? That doesn't seem to be no connection. Everybody, there is a connection. When we discuss the refutation, when we refute these two philosophical schools, so they say, when we say, for instance, this is good, this is bad, this is pus and blood, this is water, etc. So the Sautrantika and the Vibhashika, they would say all these phenomena that appear to us, they are the result of partless particles. So it all comes down to these smallest particles, these partless particles, and the external world, it's an aggregation of all these partless particles. This is how our external world forms. This is what the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika says. So when we say whether it's an apple or a peach or all these different objects, houses, etc., they come together. They're like an aggregation of these very subtle particles. And then with regard to like consciousnesses, they don't accept that there are imprints ripening on the basis of that. We see an apple, we see a peach. They don't accept that at all. They say, no, it's everything there. It's everything exists from the side of the object in terms of there being these partless particles that then form the external world. It's got nothing to do with the mind. There's this objective world out there because of these partless particles. Therefore, there's a connection. So apples and so forth, they're this aggregation of these subtle particles, they say, and that's got nothing to do with our mind. It's just we see what's there. Therefore, yes, it makes sense that to you it seems there's no relation to the different imprints in the mind, for instance, but actually, when we say these partless particles, when we talk about these partless particles, yes, but I mean, I understand where this question comes from. So, I mean, even in my case, they sometimes feel like, oh, it's not very clear why. But in summary, these external objects, what are they made of? What are their building blocks? The building blocks are these partless particles, partless atoms. So that's their view. That's like there's this fundamental, there's this kind of final, ultimate building block. And that building block forms everything. So actually, everything that they built must have parts. So all the parts have the parts. So if the building blocks, the fundamental building blocks, so anyway, so their view is basically that if there were particles like these fundamental building blocks, if they had parts, they would say that you could divide it endlessly. You can divide these particles endlessly, and there will never be a time when they form aggregates, that they form coarser objects. That's their assertion, that it's impossible. Therefore, if you can divide up each particle further in smaller parts then it's endless, and you never reach a point where many particles come together to form something coarser. Similarly, so that being the case, therefore, they assert a particle that is like a fundamental building block that exists fundamentally as a partless entity, as a final kind of entity. And for that reason, they also don't speak about imprints. They say there's no kind of subjective kind of perception with regard to imprints ripening and so forth. So there's this objective world, it's very fundamentally true, etc. So having this true existence out there, therefore particles imprints don't play any part. So therefore, when we talk about phenomena, like these different phenomena that appear to us, they don't talk of them as appearances, as mere appearances, as imprints ripening. So there's this sense of like just an objective world. So because of these partless particles, everything comes into existence. Actually, in the Madhyamika school, They don't say that everything is in the nature of mind, but they say that everything appears to us because of imprints. So this part they accept. Here in this way, Cittamatra and Madhyamika is similar. They do say that, for instance, the reason we say pus or blood, pus and blood or water or nectar and so forth, it's all to do with the imprints in our mind. For instance, when we accumulate virtuous karma as a result of that, when we are in a room such as this, in this house like this building, uh, we, while we sit in this room, we have a special feeling, we have a special understand or a special perception of this room. So whether it benefits us or not, where we perceive this as beneficial and so forth, it all has to do with our karma. So the experience of just being in this building is different if we've accumulated a lot of positive karma. So our perception, our experiences are connected to the different karmic imprints ripening. Anyway, let's continue with the text. So verse 26. So what is this verse about? So here this presents the view of the Cittamatra schools. For those who propound consciousness only, this manifold world is established as mind only. What might be the nature of that consciousness? I shall now explain this very point. So these words are saying that this is the Cittamatra view that is presented for those who propound consciousness only, etc. What I said earlier with regard to the mind only school. So anyway, it's not that important. What is really clear is we went through so yesterday actually the verses have actually changed a little bit since I have this other version of the text. So in the Cittamatra school, anyway, they say that these external phenomena that appear to the mind, they're the nature of the mind. What might be the nature of that consciousness? That will be explained. So when you look at the words, now what does the mind only school say with regard to the mind? They say the mind exists substantially, the mind exists truly. They say that, for instance, the mind basis of all, that is the self, and that I will explain. So these 3 lines they explain here, the Cittamatra school. So what do they say? All phenomena in the nature of the mind. There is no external object. Everything is just an appearance to the mind. When we say the forms or physical objects appear to the mind, they're mere appearances. They don't exist. They don't exist external to the mind. It seems like the external objects are very distant from the mind. They're over there. The mind is over here and the objects are over there. There's a sense of a distance. There's a sense of like disconnect between the mind and its object. This mind that perceives objects to be disconnected, to be over there, to be distant. So that kind of, so whether it's forms, visual forms or sounds and so forth, there's this sense of like difference, of like a very clear difference between mind and object. Now this appearance is mistaken. When it comes to the external appearances, they don't exist in the way as external objects. They are just appearances to the mind. Like in a dream, when you dream, you dream of a horse. Well, at that time there is no actual horse out there. It's just an appearance to the mind. And the mind itself, that exists truly. According to the Cittamatra school, it exists truly. If everything is just a mistaken appearance and then the mind is also mistaken, that doesn't work. According to the school, something has to be truly existent in order to account for the fact that the external appearances are mistaken, or that there's a mistaken aspect to them. Now, when we see these different objects, beautiful things, ugly things, and so forth, pleasing and unpleasing objects, etc., that is all these objects, when it comes to the sense objects, None of them exist the way they appear, but then the mind has to have a kind of a more real existence. So phenomena are mere appearances to the mind, which is why the mind has to be truly existent, has to exist in a slightly different way. And that's how the Cittamatra school explains it. It's not possible to say that everything is false. According to the Cittamatra school, they wouldn't be able to explain it that way, that everything is false. Later, some of the verses also talk about the three natures, and based on that, the Cittamatra school is refuted. Anyway, so here we get a rough sense of what the Cittamatra school is all about. So if all phenomena are merely in the nature of the mind, if the external phenomena don't exist, so in that case, there are actually a lot of reasonings for the Cittamatra school. Well, the Cittamatra school applies a lot of reasons for saying so, and also there are scriptural quotes that say all phenomena come from the mind. All phenomena are, there's only mind. So all the environment is merely mind. Therefore, the Buddha has actually talked about that. The Buddha himself has taught the Cittamatra school. So now we need to see that we have to recognize the contradiction to other explanations the Buddha has said, in the sense of like understanding that these teachings cannot be taken literally. So when we say all phenomena are merely mind, we're not saying that nothing exists. I mean, that would be extreme. So the objects we see around us, so the physical objects, they're like reflections. So for instance, the reflection in a mirror and a mirage. There is an existence there, of course, but we're not saying everything is non-existent. Not everything is mistaken. We're not saying there's nothing there. So if we say that nothing exists the way it appears, then that would be difficult. So anyway, there's a purpose for us. But when he said all of this is but one's mind, it's actually to alleviate the fear of childish beings. When we talk, for instance, of a creator God, so here the mind really becomes like a creator God. It says, for instance, in Entry into the Middle Way. So it's the mind that is responsible for the external and the internal environment. We're not saying it's like a creator God in the same way as we don't say the mind is really like a creator God in the same sense as God is asserted to be a creator of the environment. But there's some similarity that everything arises from the mind. Everything arises through the mind because of appearing to the mind. And for instance, when we talk about samsara, that is the mind creates samsara. The mind is responsible for liberation. So the difference between samsara and liberation, the difference, it all comes down to the mind. The difference exists on the basis of the mind. Therefore, for ordinary beings, the childish, so they have fear. They're fearful, and to overcome particular types of fear, therefore, the Buddha taught the Cittamatra school. He taught that the external objects are mere appearances, but that the mind really exists, and that is the creator of reality. So this is actually accepted to be interpretative. So it needs to be interpreted. It's not definitive. These teachings the Buddha gave on the Cittamatra school. Then the text continues with refuting the Cittamatra with the Cittamatra view. So then verse 28, the imputed, the dependent, and the consummate, they have only one nature of their own, emptiness. Their identities are constructed upon the mind. So here it talks about the imputed, the dependent. Imputed means, imputed refers to imputed phenomena that exist and imputed phenomena that don't exist. For instance, space, uncompounded space. So all permanent. So a lot of the permanent phenomena are included in the imputed natures. So the basis of perception of a mind and so forth. So these are considered to be permanent. They're considered to be imputed. And then dependent refers to all the permanent phenomena. And the consummate here, or sometimes translated as thoroughly established. So we say, for instance, that the dependent, the emptiness of the imputed on the basis of the dependent is the consummate. So when for instance, when blue appears to a conceptual mind, we say that this basis, from the point of view of blue being the basis of the conceptual mind, it doesn't exist by way of its own characteristics. So this is the consummate. When we talk about external phenomena, for instance, I mean, like form and so forth, that appear to be external phenomena, when they appear to the mind, actually they appear as separate from the mind, appear as different substantial entities, but the lack of mind and its object existing as different substantial entities, that is also described as emptiness. So here, for instance, the object of negation of emptiness here, that is imputed. And the emptiness of that's the consummate. Anyway, so only one nature of their own emptiness. The identities are constructed upon the mind. In the Cittamatra school, you have these three natures. But based on that, the Madhyamaka system is different. They don't really talk about the three natures. So only one nature of their own emptiness, the identities are constructed upon the mind. So the mind here, when we talk about how does the mind exist, the way the mind appears, its nature, so being a conventional truth, its final nature, here everything has to do with the mind here. So anyway, so the appearances are described as imputed. So then the mind itself is a dependent phenomenon, and then the emptiness of the mind, that's the consummate. So these three characteristics, these three natures of the mind, actually, although they're explained in the Cittamatra school, they can be also explained, although they're actually the Madhyamaka school can explain these three as well. There's no contradiction to the Madhyamaka view, even though they may not explain them to the same degree. So when we say, for instance, the mind being clear knowing, that aspect of the mind being clear knowing, when the mind, for instance, perceives an object, it perceives different objects, it perceives true existence, it perceives that mind and object are different substantial entities, it perceives impermanent, permanent phenomena. It has all these different appearances that arise in the mind. Things appear in different phenomena. So imputed phenomena appear to the mind, for instance. And then the mind itself is a dependent phenomenon. Many of the appearances are imputed phenomena. However, what appears to the mind, many of the objects that appear to the mind that don't exist, they are imputed, and their emptiness, in the case of, for instance, external existence, that is the consummate. Anyway, so all this is explained in relation to the mind. Only one nature of their own emptiness, their identities are constructed upon the mind. To those who delight in the great vehicle, the Buddha taught in brief selflessness and perfect equanimity, and that the mind is primordially unborn. That's verse 29. So what does it say in the commentaries? I'm not sure. So Rinpoche says, or no, it says Rinpoche says he's not sure whether this is correct, that there's some connection to the tantric path, but Rinpoche is not sure this is the case. But anyway, to those who delight in the great vehicle, so here when we say the universal vehicle, with regard to the Madhyamika. So here the great vehicle actually refers to the Madhyamika views, to the Madhyamika view, in the sense that phenomena don't exist externally, don't exist external phenomena don't exist truly, but the mind exists truly. So, for instance, the 5 aggregates. So whatever, so in the other schools they say everything exists the way it appears, but the Cittamatra school says that there are no external phenomena. Only the mind itself exists truly. So there's this difference in the lower two schools. By Bhashikanta Tantrika, they say phenomena exist, the external existence exists truly. That's not what the Cittamatra accepts. They don't say they're external phenomena, but they say the mind exists truly. But actually, all phenomena have to have the same existence. In the Madhyamika school, they say that all phenomena are equally lack true existence. So therefore, the mind is primordially unborn. Even the mind doesn't exist truly. So in the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, this is explained very extensively. So devoid of entities and so forth. You remember this text, the quote from the Guhya Samaja Tantra. So that was explained in there. It also says that the mind and objects, they have an equal existence when it comes to true existence. So this root tantra also mentions that. Therefore, so this is actually taught for those of greater intelligence. Anyway, verse 30 says, the proponents of yogic practices assert that a purified mind through mastery of one's mind and so forth. Here now it's explaining why that mastery of one's own mind and through utter revolution of its state is the sphere of its own reflexive awareness. So our mind right now that is defiled, we have so many different defilements. For instance, the coarser ones when we talk about like intellectually acquired afflictions as an example. So in the Svatantrika school, they don't talk about cognitive obstructions that are intellectually acquired. They don't distinguish in that way. In the Svatantrika school, they distinguish between intellectually acquired and innate cognitive obstructions. I don't think the Madhyamika, the Prasangika school would have said that. They don't say the imprints, they're intellectually acquired ones and so forth. They don't apply that terminology. Anyway, everything is so they talk about a pure mind. For instance, the mind that realizes emptiness directly. So there's a self-knower, a reflexive awareness. So therefore, in the Cittamatra school, they have to assert this kind of reflexive awareness or this self-knower, because otherwise they can't account for the fact that the consciousness exists truly. So we say something exists, we can only say it exists because we saw it, because there's a mind that sees it. For instance, when you say, is there something inside your room? And if you say, yes, it is inside, is there food inside? Yes, because I saw it, or because I ate it. So there must be a consciousness, there must be a mind. For instance, with regard to an object, does it exist or not? We can only determine its existence if there's a mind that perceives it. So what about the mind itself? When we say the mind exists truly, in the Cittamatra school, they say the mind exists truly. So what is it that determines that the mind exists truly? Well, that's the self-knower. Because otherwise, if that didn't exist, then another person would have to decide whether our mind exists or not. But then their mind also has to be perceived by another mind, by another person's mind. And now you have this endless regress. This is something that neither the Cittamatra nor the Madhyamikas would assert. So they must have a mind. You must have another mind that perceives the sense consciousnesses, for instance, and that then determine that the sense consciousnesses exist truly. Therefore, they assert a self-awareness, or like not a self-awareness, a self-knower, a reflexive awareness called Radik in Tibetan. So this particular mind is asserted in the Cittamatra school. So for instance, is it possible for others, for phenomena to arise from something different, from something inherently different? So some people would say, well, yeah, you can see it. You can see that phenomena arise from something inherently different. And likewise, the Cittamatra school argues, well, of course, the mind exists truly. You have a mind that perceives it as existing truly. So how do we determine whether something exists or not? Well, it must have a mind that perceives it. This is similar here. And then with regard to the self-knower knows itself. So we don't need another mind. That's the assertion when it comes to the self-knower or the reflexive awareness. So for instance, a fire that is hot, so it heats up itself. You don't need another entity, another source that heats the fire. The fire itself heatens itself. So for instance, a butter lamp, if you have a butter lamp, for instance, so that clarity or illumination, the light of the butter lamp, that comes from itself. It doesn't need an external source of light. So it's clarity or it's light, the light of the butter lamp. It exists truly. And also a fire, it establishes itself. So the heat comes from itself, or the light comes from itself. So that's how the Cittamatra school argues. They say that, for instance, the self-knower, it knows itself, or the mind, it exists by itself. So its whole nature comes from itself. It doesn't need anything else to exist. Just in the same way as the light comes from the butter lamp. So here the word Rinpoche used selbu means it doesn't mean clear, but it means a light. So light, the butter lamp, all the light comes from the butter lamp itself. It doesn't need an external light source. Therefore, it illuminates itself, basically. So you can see the butter lamp because the light comes from itself that illuminates itself. So that it's something that comes from the side of the object. It comes from it has everything it needs. The butter lamp has everything it needs to illuminate itself. It doesn't depend on anything else to be able to do so. Is this clear? I'm not sure. She said whether. So if the butter lamp eliminates itself, well, that being the case, that's how the Cittamatra explains it. But the Madhyamika doesn't assert this. So in the Madhyamika school, they say that there are other phenomena responsible, that they're responsible for the butter lamp illuminating phenomena. So they don't accept that it comes from itself. The Madhyamika school would say the butter lamp is dependent on many other factors. So in the Cittamatra school, actually, the Madhyamika school would argue, if you're saying that the butter lamp illuminates itself, then it's totally independent. The Madhyamika school asserts, of course, that the butter lamp illuminates. Of course, they say the same, but they accept that there are other phenomena, that it depends on many other phenomena based on which, therefore, it illuminates. If it illuminated itself, the Madhyamika school would argue, if it illuminated itself, then also darkness has to obscure itself. So darkness, if there's darkness, we can't see the objects because it's obscured by the darkness. We say the object is obscured because the darkness obscures these things that we can no longer see. So if the argument here is, if the light bulb illuminates itself, then darkness must just obscure itself. If darkness obscures itself, then it would follow that we cannot see darkness, but we can see darkness. Darkness doesn't obscure itself because we can see darkness. Is this a little bit? Oh. So therefore, the Madhyamika school, this Madhyamika school says there's no self-knower. They don't accept the existence. The Prasangika school says there's no self-knower.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the translations as well. Once again, I'm sorry if this is just totally off kilter, but if it's saying that the purified mind, proponents of yogic practices assert that a purified mind affected through mastery of one's own mind, is the purified mind the Buddha mind or enlightenment? And if so, isn't that not dependent on conditions? Maybe we can wait on this one too, unless others are interested.
Okay, I hope I understand it correctly. Tanda kusweti disungdu karsa pena sheba tagbado tagba sheba da uchi da samigi sheba tangi rumchi sonsura doningos nu do nyamsha ishi do la ina da dindu nyamsha ishi di sangigi semre dindu semdi da ji tabe sem samigi sem yimba inza da chushen la madwe sheba shirbe sangigi sheba rbe chushen la madwe sheba rbe. So when we talk about a pure mind, as explained earlier, so there are different types of pure minds. So pure minds from the point of view of having eliminated coarser types of obstructions. We speak of the path of seeing, for instance. So the path of seeing is a mind that has eliminated some of the coarser afflictions, so the intellectually acquired afflictions. So it's pure of that. In particular, the subsequent kind of meditative equipoise that has eliminated these, said to be a pure mind, but pure is in relation to particular afflictions that have been overcome, obstructions that have been overcome. So actually the Buddha's mind is the purest mind. So the purest mind is a Buddha's mind. Not every mind that is pure is that final pure mind or this ultimate final mind, this ultimate pure mind. But it doesn't mean that it exists independently. Even the Buddha's mind is dependent on other factors. So even enlightenment doesn't exist inherently. There's nothing, and this is the Prasangika school. Whatever exists is dependent on other factors, dependent on causes and conditions and so forth. So in that sense, nothing exists. There's not a single speck of phenomena. It's not a single particle of dust that could exist inherently. Anyway, so we'll explain this more. So verse 30 says, the proponents of yoga practice said that a purified mind affected through mastery of one's own mind and through utter revolution of its state is the sphere of its own reflexive awareness, which means basically that we can establish, or the Cittamatra school says that the mind exists truly because there's this reflexive awareness, there's this self-knower that can establish this true existence. And verse 31, that which is past is no more, that which is yet not to be is not obtained. As it abides at locus is utterly transformed, and so forth. So they're saying that phenomena. So saying that phenomena exists truly, well, here we're refuting this by saying that we can divide the mind into different times in terms of the first moment, the second moment. So that which is the past of the mind is no more. That which is yet to be doesn't exist yet. It's not obtained. And as it abides, so the present moment of time is locus is utterly transformed. We can't posit it. If you take one mind, for instance, one consciousness. So here, this is refuting that it exists truly. We don't need to talk about a pure mind or whatever kind of mind, just our present mind. So our mind that exists moment by moment. So the former moments of mind are gone. The future mind hasn't arrived yet, hasn't come into existence yet. So when we talk about mind, we can only talk about the present mind. But actually, the present mind also can be further divided into a former moment and a later moment. So one moment in time has a later moment. It consists of a later moment and an earlier moment. So you can divide any moment in time. So I don't know how to put this, like, how can you describe it, like a closer kind of moment or a sub-moment, if you like. So if you have a moment in time, so you always have a former moment. That one moment consists of a former moment, a later moment, and a moment that is in between. So there always it always exists of another three moments in time. So you can divide it at least into two parts, a former and a later moment. So the present moment right now, that present moment here, it connects to, so the former moment connects to past moments. The future moments connect to further future moments. And so basically you can again and again divide each moment. You can divide it endlessly, and there's always former moments, always later moments. So what is the exact present moment? It's very difficult to posit an exact present moment. Also, when we talk about consciousness, it's a continuum. We talk about a former continuum, a later continuum, a future continuum, and so forth. So a present continuum in that way. Anyway, if we didn't have a past moment, you couldn't have a present moment. If there's no future moment, there's no present moment. The present is dependent on the past and the future. Saying it's possible to have a present moment that is not dependent on the past and the future. That's impossible. So the present is dependent. It can only be the present if there's a past and if there's a future. Therefore, the present is dependent. It is posited on the basis of past and future. There's nothing that doesn't exist in relation to other phenomena. So if we think about this, maybe this is that may be beneficial. So when we say day and night, we speak of day and night. These two, day and night. If everything were a day, where we say if everything was the daytime, if everything was daytime, would we really have daytime? If everything were the nighttime, well, would we really have nighttime? So nighttime and daytime, they're dependent on each other. They're interdependent. So independence on nighttime, you have daytime, and independence on daytime, you have nighttime. So to have daytime, independence on that, you must have a different time based on which you can distinguish between daytime, distinguishing it from everything else. If everything were daytime, all phenomena were daytime, how would we distinguish? How could it be daytime, therefore? Because there wouldn't be anything different in relation to which it would be daytime. So therefore, everything that exists can only exist in relation to something else. So going back to the mind, again, saying that there's a smallest moment in time, that doesn't make sense. So before I spoke about that, Nagarjuna is really precious because he presented or he reintroduced the Madhyamika view. So there are a lot of very powerful reasonings, very helpful reasonings that help us to understand how phenomena really exist. So there are endless reasonings that Nagarjuna presented that prove that there's no true existence. So when we say, well, for instance, walking, does walking exist inherently or not? What is walking? So when we walk, for instance, saying I go or I walk, so we lift our right foot, then we place it on the ground, then we lift the other foot and then place that on the ground. And so it's this kind of movement, this movement of the feet. So when we say there's inherent walking, we should be able to point it. We need to be able to point at something. So we can't look at the place that the feet are lifted, are placed on. No, it has to be the feet. It has to be that which moves. So when we place the foot on the ground, is that walking? Well, that's not walking. Or when we lift the foot, is that walking? So this time while the foot is in the air, is that walking? So then here, even the foot has parts. Which part of the foot is walking? So the foot is walking. Therefore, where's the walking on the basis of the foot? So the foot has many different parts. So it's this solid object that has that is made of many different, that is formed by many different parts. Which part is walking? So the front part. So in the relation to the front part, we say the upper part is walking and so forth. So it's in relation to these different parts that we say one does this and one does something else. But we cannot find it something solid. So when we think about it, we get a sense this is true. So when we say walking, it's actually walking is a movement. That which is moving is the foot. So is it the entire foot that is moving? So just lifting the foot, is that walking? We can't say that just lifting the foot is walking. So there needs to be a movement. We need to be a movement. There needs to be a movement in terms of going from one place to the next. So one aspect has to go to a different aspect. And so therefore, is it the whole foot that is moving? And where does the movement come from? So, for instance, before you place the foot, the first part of the foot is already on the ground. So the front part is already on the ground. Then the heel is not on the ground yet, and so forth. So which one is walking, which one is not walking? Anyway, it's difficult to really place something. Also, when we talk about time, does a month exist? A month exists of many days. Where's 1 month? Where's 1 month? So these 30 days, for instance, are described to be a month. So is after the first day, on the first day of the month, has the first month come into existence? No, because the 30 days have not happened yet. Or after 29 days, the 1 month is gone. So, or after the first day, you only have 29 days left. So the month is gone because there's no month that has 29 days. So therefore, actually, if it's just labeled, when we just label the 1 month on the basis of its path, that's okay. It's just an appearance of the mind. There's no contradiction because it's just imputed, it's just labeled by the mind on the basis of labels and so forth. But if a month exists truly, we should be able to point at that 1 month. What is this exact month? Therefore, here when we say that which just passes no more. So as it abides, the locus is utterly transformed. So where can be such an awareness in the present? Then 32, whatever it is, it's not what it appears as. Now, so whatever appears to us, it doesn't exist the way it appears to us. So the way it appears to us, phenomena don't exist. Whatever it appears as it is not so. Consciousness is devoid of selfhood. So therefore, phenomena, the way they appear to us, they don't exist that way when it comes to the mind and the object. So it seems that phenomena exist autonomously, as if they existed in and of themselves. So when we say the mind, well, so it says later on also that the mind doesn't exist truly. So this self doesn't exist substantially, doesn't exist truly. So that's what we're doing here. We're refuting this view of the Cittamatra school. So consciousness is devoid of selfhood. It's selfless. Yet consciousness has no other basis. Now, for instance, the Cittamatra school says that the mind basis of all, the Alavijnaya, that is the mind, that is the person. So in the Cittamatra school, you have this assertion of 8 consciousnesses, and that the 8th consciousness, the Alavijnaya, or the mind basis of all, that is the self, that is the person. So it's neither virtues, there's no non-virtues. It's a neutral kind of mind that is always present. But that is impossible. That has no basis. Because the mind doesn't exist truly. So how can you say that the Alavijnaya, or the mind basis of all, exists? That's what verse 32 explains. consciousness itself lacks true existence. It doesn't exist truly. So the self doesn't exist truly, doesn't exist inherently. In 33, it says, by being close to a lodestone, an iron object swiftly moves forward. It possesses no mind of its own, yet it appears as if it does. So a lodestone or a magnet. So the magnet basically moves the objects, iron objects around. So it possesses no mind of its own. So it doesn't need a mind for the magnet to move things around. So there's no kind of volition. Yes, yet it appears as if it does. So it seems that there's something truly there, like some kind of mind. Then 34, likewise the foundational consciousness too appears to be real, though it is false. So here the Alavishnaya, or the foundational consciousness as it's called here. So here we're actually... So actually here, this is not the Alavishnaya in the sense of how it's usually explained, but here foundational consciousness, Rinpoche explains, we say that the mind that is responsible for samsara and nirvana, so that is here explained to be foundational consciousness. So it's just our general mind. So the mind that perceives, the mind that attains liberation, the mind that is reborn in the lower realms. So all this is the mind. That's the foundational consciousness. So that doesn't exist truly. It does. It's not. It appears to be real, but it is false. So it appears to be real. It appears to be truly existent, but it doesn't exist that way. In this way, it moves to and fro and retains the three realms of existence. So on the basis of this mind, we're reborn. We're reborn. So for instance, from a previous life, we've been born into this life, and we'll be born in the future, in future existences, and that's how we cycle in samsara. Therefore, we continue to exist in samsara on the basis of the mind. Then 35, just as the ocean and the trees move about, though they possess no mind, likewise foundational consciousness too move about in dependence on the mind. So for taking the ocean, taking trees as an example, so they move around, they do things, they move, they perform function and so forth. So that doesn't mean that the foundational consciousness, just because it moves about, that this is the person. So when we say the foundational consciousness is the person, the Alavishnaya is the person, well, why were they the same that? So that which is reborn is the self. Usually that's the assertion comes from the fact that the Buddha says that which is reborn is the self. And since consciousness is reborn, we say that consciousness is the self. That's one of the main reasons why many philosophers say that that consciousness is the mind. So the consciousness comes from a previous life, it continues on to a next life. That's what consciousness does. Well, that's what moves from life to life, that which moves through the different lives. So it's that which appropriates the body, for instance. It takes a new body, so that goes from life to life. That being the case, but that doesn't mean that the foundational consciousness is the self, or that it exists truly. So the consciousness, the foundational consciousness, moves from life to life. Well, it moves in dependence upon the body. So because we have a body, for instance, its basis is the body. We say, for instance, the mental consciousness is dependent on the mental sense factor. It always needs a basis. It needs a physical basis. But there's not more to it. So that's how we say it moves. So 36. So it is considered that without a body, there's no consciousness. So, oh, sorry, this is still 35. So it's because the foundational consciousness takes on the different body, we say it moves. For instance, the eye consciousness, it depends on the sense faculty or the sense power. On that basis, eye consciousnesses can arise. So we say there's a difference between the sense faculty and the sense consciousness. They're different. They're different. Maybe in English it sounds like as if they were the same. But an eye consciousness does depend on the sense organ. It depends on the sense faculties. So likewise, the foundational consciousness also depends on a body, just as the sense consciousnesses depend on the body, on the sense faculties, on the sense powers. Likewise, the foundational consciousness, the mental consciousness, that depends on the body. It must have a physical aggregate. So this is the basis for the foundational mind. So in dependence on different body, we say it moves. It's not truly existent. It is not a self that exists truly and that moves truly. Then verse 36. So if it is considered that without a body there's no consciousness, you must explain what it is this awareness that is the object of one's own specific knowledge. So when we say consciousness, it is based on the body. So it moves, therefore we say it moves between different lives. So without the sense faculty, without the sense power, there wouldn't be any movement of the mind. There wouldn't be any activity of the mind. The consciousness depends on the sense faculties, on the body and so forth, on the object as well, external objects. So also it depends on the previous moment and immediately preceding consciousness. On the basis of that, we can say that a consciousness is active. It moves. It knows. It's clear and knowing. So what do we say with consciousness? Consciousness, we say that's something that clearly perceives something. How does it do so? It does in dependence on the sense faculty, and depends, or sense power, and depends on the object, and in dependence on the immediately preceding awareness. So when we take an eye consciousness that perceives a physical form, we need a previous moment of awareness. Without a previous moment of awareness, you couldn't have a present awareness. Therefore, in dependence on all these different factors, a mind perceives things, it perceives objects. So it does so in dependence on other things. It exists in dependence on other phenomena. It exists in dependence on many other objects. Therefore, it's a dependently arisen phenomenon. Because it's a dependently arisen phenomenon, that's its nature. Therefore, the mind is clear in knowing. It's clear in knowing. So how can you say that you need a self-knower, that something knows itself? For instance, the self-knower knows itself, or it exists in and of itself. So it's like they're actually saying that the Cittamatra school would say that the mind exists truly. It is clear and it's a clear clear and knowing entity. Well, it decides it, because the self-knower that is a part of it, that decides, basically. So it's like it itself decides that it is a clear and knowing faculty. So it exists like that in and of itself. But actually that's not true. There's so many other objects, so many other phenomena on which it depends. The Madhyamika school would argue, the Prasangika school would argue, but that doesn't make sense. It depends on so many other objects. It's impossible that it exists in and of itself as a consciousness, as a clear and knowing entity. Verse 37, by calling a specific awareness of itself, you're asserting it to be an entity, yet by stating it is this. So here's pointing out the contradiction. So if there is this self-knower, specific awareness of itself, which is a part of that mind, so you're asserting it to be an entity, yet by stating that it is, you're asserting it also to be powerful. So powerless. So it's an entity, in a permanent phenomenon. Here entity means truly existent. So kind of an independent, truly existent entity. So when you say the self-knower, it establishes itself. So if it establishes itself, it knows itself. So it establishes itself. Therefore, when we think about this, so that's empty. That's an empty kind of. That's an empty kind of statement. So that's like out of despair. You basically you can't say anything else. So you have to say that it's kind of this. You're asserting it is also powerless. So it just shows us that you can't answer this properly. The self-knower knows itself and doesn't need another awareness. So that shows your despair, basically, or your inability to really answer this properly. So yet by stating that it is this, you're asserting it also to be powerless. So your explanation is powerless or empty, basically. So what establishes the self-knower? It establishes itself. Well, that is powerless, basically. So what establishes the mind? You're not able to really explain that explain this. You're not able to prove that the mind exists truly. So this is what it means here when it says it's powerless. You're arguing it is powerless. And she says, I think this is what this means here. Anyway, so Cittamatra, in the Cittamatra school, they say that the mind establishes itself. So really what this means is that in the end that the Cittamatra school can't really establish mind, can't really establish the existence of, or the true existence of the mind. So really that's implied in that I can't really explain it. That's what verse 37 says, especially the last line. Then verse 38, having ascertained oneself and to help others ascertain, the learner proceeds excellently, always without error. So first we need to understand, really understand the situation. Then when we understand how phenomena really exist, then I can explain it. So how does the mind really exist? So once we can understand it, then we can help others to ascertain or understand that as well. Then we can understand things without any error. But you don't have enough self-confidence. You're just explaining something that doesn't have any real foundation. So it's like out of despair in the sense of not being able to properly explain it. That's why you come up with this explanation, but you can't explain it without mistake. You can't explain it in a way that is free from error. That's what verse 38 says. Then 39. So how is it really? The cognizer perceives the cognizable. Without the cognizable, there's no cognition. So without an object, there's no mind. So without the cognizable, there's no cognition. Therefore, why do you not admit it, and so forth? So you need an object. So in dependence on that which is cognized, you say that is a cognition. And because it's a cognition, there's something cognizable. So they exist independent on each other. There's a mutual dependence of cognizable and cognition. Therefore, when we say the mind and the self-knower, so the self-knower is that which cognizes, and the object is the cognizable. So then it's actually said to be one mind. So the Cittamatra asserts that the self-knower is part of that which it knows. But you can't have one object that is the cognition and the cognizable in relation to the same object. So it cannot be that which cognizes the cognizable, but also be the cognizable that is perceived by the cognition. That it can't be in relation to the same object. That's impossible to have one object. That's impossible, that the self-knower, that there is one mind, that in relation to itself is both the cognizer and the cognizable. So the Prasangika school says that this is not possible. They give the example, for instance, a knife. If you have a knife can't cut itself. No matter how sharp a knife is, it cannot cut itself. Or an athlete, for instance, they cannot stand on their own shoulder. So although they're very strong, they can do anything, but they can't stand on their own shoulder. So there are a lot of examples that refute the self-knower. So no matter how clear an eye consciousness can't see itself. So these are some of the analogies that the Prasangika school gives. So in dependence on mind, we say there's an object. So the cognizable is dependent on the cognition that cognizes this object, and vice versa. So what establishes the mind? So the cognizable is a cognizable in relation to cognition. That's what the present Giga school says. How does the cognizable, how can we say the cognizable exists? What establishes it? It's the cognition. And the cognition, what establishes that? We don't need another cognition that now establishes the cognition. You don't need something else. What establishes the existence of cognition? It is the object, that which it cognizes. So that which it sees, the object that it perceives, the object that it apprehends. So the cognition, it cognizes something, and on the basis of that we can say cognition exists. So that which establishes cognition, that which establishes the existence of cognition, is not another mind, but it's object. So how do we say, do you understand? So the cognizable, it depends on the cognition, and the cognition depends on the cognizable. So because it cognizes something, because it has an object, we can say that cognition exists. In that way, we can say that establishes its existence. So the cognition itself doesn't cognize itself. Is that clear? So therefore, the cognizable is depending on the cognition is depending on the cognizable. Is that clear? But not just that. We say that they depend on each other, so cognizable and cognition, they're mutually dependent. But we say also cognition when we say consciousness. So how do you say Shipa? Usually Shipa, it's consciousness. It's translated as cognition. So Shipa, the word Shipa, consciousness, it implies there's something that is the mind is conscious of. So Shipa actually in Tibetan, it means knower, actually, literally translated knower. So consciousness you can translate as knower because it implies that it knows something, or cognition or cognizer here. It implies that something is cognized. So in general, if there were no mind, if there were no cognizable object, if there was nothing that knew, so Shipa actually, we don't say the mind is a knower. So in Tibetan, mind and cognizer are different. Mind and cognition are different. They're different words. So if there were no cognizables, no objects to be cognized, there wouldn't be any cognition. So Tito is probably Chinese. So if there were no cognition, there wouldn't be anything cognizable. If there was nothing cognizable, there wouldn't be a cognition. So we say something is cognizable because there is something that cognizes it. So there must be a cognizer, there must be a consciousness that does so. So therefore, the best example may be this. So to give you another example, in the 9th chapter of the Bodhisattva way of life. So for instance, father and son. Abba as like father and mother. How can you couldn't talk about a father unless they had a child? And also you can't have a son or a daughter if there are no parents. So we say in dependence on the parents, you have daughter and son. And because someone has a daughter or son, we can say that they're father or mother. So they depended on each other. Cause and effect are just like that. So that which creates something and that which is created, cognition and cognizer, they're all dependent on each other. And what I talked about before, I thought I talked about this before. So in the first class we had together. So for instance, when we talk about food, so independence on us, this is food. So this is in relation to us being human. So in relation to us as human beings, we eat certain food. So it's independence on us as humans. It's dependence on us, but without anyone eating, if there were no humans to eat it, if there were no sentient being to eat it, then it wouldn't be food. If it were in and of itself food, then if it were food in and of itself, it would be food for everyone. But actually, that's not true. So for us, for instance, meat is something something eatable, but there are many other sentient beings that wouldn't eat meat, and for them, therefore, meat is not something edible. Therefore, for instance, vegetarian or sweet kind of food is food in relation to us, but it's not food in relation to certain animals. So, for instance, yeah, certain animals, certain fish, they wouldn't eat sweet food. So when we say food, food exists in relation to other phenomena. It depends on other phenomena. So, for instance, when we say iron or stones, are they food or not? No one would say they're food. So stone is not food. And what about something rotten, something moldy? Is that food? No, we wouldn't say it's. But there are things like for instance, old meat, for instance, moldy meat. Well, there are animals who eat it. For them, it's food, but for us, it's not. So in the scriptures, they talk about a lot of different types of meat, for instance, and some. Oh, there's so actually in the scriptures they talk about certain animals also who eat stones and iron and so forth. So therefore it's food actually. So it's possible that there are particular animals, for instance, that eat certain substances. So maybe there are also even scientists talk about this, that there are certain types of animals that no longer exist, that are extinct now. Anyway, so there are a lot of things that we wouldn't consider to be food we couldn't digest. For instance, wood. So we don't eat wood, we can't eat wood, but there are certain insects that eat, like little worms that eat wood. So therefore, there's nothing from the side of the object that says it's food. It depends on the being who eats it, the being that eats it. So this is the same with cognition and cognizable. This is actually true for all phenomena. So the cognizable perceives the cognizable, therefore what do you not admit? Then it goes on, 40, the mind is but a mere name. Apart from its name, it exists as nothing. So view consciousness as a mere name. Name too has no intrinsic nature. So the mind is a mere nature. It's mere name. It's merely labeled. It doesn't exist intrinsically. So apart from its name, it exists as nothing. So even the name itself, the label we apply, being labeled, even that label we apply, it has no intrinsic nature. So even the term we use, the label we use to refer to something, so if the object doesn't exist inherently, then the label that is applied to the object cannot exist inherently. They depend on each other. So the label and that which is labeled, they depend on each other. They're mutually dependent. So when we say subject and object, they exist on independence on each other. So perfect, permanent and impermanent. So the dependence here is different, but still permanent and impermanent depend on each other. So over here, over there, the mountain over here, the mountain over there, wet and dry, cause and effect. All of these are mutually dependent. If we think about it, there are many examples of phenomena being mutually dependent. It says in the Precious Garland, so the form is mere name, and so the same applies to the different elements. So even mere mind, doesn't mere label, the mere label doesn't exist. So the mere name doesn't exist. So this is what the Precious Garland, for instance, says. So the form is mere name, it says in the Precious Garland, and so this is true for all the other factors that make up a person, and so even the mere name doesn't exist inherently. So therefore, all phenomena lack inherent existence. They're merely labeled. They're merely posited on the basis of the mind, for independence on the mind and the label. It depends on conceptual mind and the label. So all these objects that appear, for instance, the light rays, for instance, the rays of the sun. We say rays of light, we say their appearances. So because of these appearances, we'd say they illuminate everything. They enable us to see things. So these objects appear to us. These rays of light, they appear to us. So for instance, so when we talk about an owl, for instance, an owl can't see, it can see in the darkness. So in the darkness, it perceives things very clearly, while in the light, it doesn't see as clearly. So it's very different for the owl. It's very different. Or when we talk about the sense consciousnesses, so the eye consciousness, for instance, so these sense consciousnesses we have, so we perceive the different sense objects. So this is form, it has a color, it has a shape, there's a building and so forth, all these different sense objects, all the objects that we desire. So form, smell, form, sound, smell, and so forth. They're all the objects we perceive. So they seem to exist objectively, they exist to be inherently. So we have a sense that everyone perceives the same that we perceive because of our sense of objective existence. But that's not the case. That's what it says here. This is not true. So for instance, when we talk about celestial beings of the form realm, so they don't depend on the sense objects. They depend on the happiness, the bliss that arises from that concentration. So they are not sustained by the sense objects the way we are sustained by the sense objects. So they don't really interact with the sense objects. It's really the mind, it's the mental element that sustains them. So it's different for these celestial beings. And then when we talk about the celestial beings of the formless realm, so there are a lot, right where we are right now, there are a lot of formless beings. So, but they have no form. They have only concentration. There's one-pointed concentration, and their feeling is that of neutral. It's just a neutral feeling. So they exist in this empty, basically, we can say in this totally empty of physical objects, and this plane and this realm where there's no physical object. So we speak about the different kind of worlds or the different kind of realms. So the desire realm and so forth. So for instance, some people, there's a story in the past, for instance, it probably was a girl or maybe it was a boy. Anyway, so there's a story. So there's a woman who had a husband. So this woman probably was a woman. So she had a good relationship with her husband, and then the husband died. So she was so sad, and she missed her spouse so much, so that the spouse kept appearing like in a dream. So actually the spouse had died, but she always had this appearance. It was like in a dream. He always appeared. So she talked to him, he appeared to her. There was this sense that the spouse is actually this husband, the late husband was actually there. So this shows that there's this mistaken appearances, that our mind can create these mistaken appearances. And so this is similar. Our mind creates a lot of mistaken appearances. So the way phenomena appear around us, everything that appears to us, all the objects around us, they seem to exist in and of themselves. It seems to be there's this permanent, stable, solid environment. So we have a sense that what we perceive, everyone else perceives, because of the sense of this objective reality out there, but that doesn't exist. So for instance, when we listen to what scientists say, for instance, so this world we live in, this planet we live in, it's so big. So when we take a plane, we have to sometimes travel for 24 hours. So there's a sense it's so far away. This world is so big. This planet Earth is so big. But when we think about the entire Earth, for instance, the sun, so how many times, 100 times bigger? The sun is so much bigger than planet Earth. And likewise, when we talk about Mars and Neptune and Jupiter and so forth. So these different planets. So the planets that are part of our solar system, they are much smaller actually. So the moon is smaller than the Earth, and then the sun is so big. So this round planet we have. So and all these different planets that revolve around us. So actually, it's so huge. And then think of the whole universe. Well, the different galaxies, the different Milky Way, the Milky Way, for instance, like our galaxy, the Milky Way. So there's so many, it consists of so many stars. And it seems in comparison to that, the planet Earth is so small. So if the world is really small, so we're so small actually. So tiny, really. Like we're like a little insect in relation to this entire world, this entire world system. When we really compare it. So we have a sense we're so big, we're so important, our body is so big, we're so important. But in actuality, in relation to all that, that's not the case. So everything exists in mutual dependence. So everything can only be posited in relation to something else. Nothing exists in and of itself. Verse 31, either within or likewise without, or somewhere in between the two. The conquerors have never found the mind, so the mind has the nature of an illusion. So the mind itself doesn't exist. The mind cannot be found. It exists somewhere within and of the external and internal. We can't really find anything that is the mind. So it doesn't exist the way it appears. Then verse 42, the distinctions of colors and shapes are that of object and subject, of male, female, and the neuter. The mind has no such fixed forms. So the mind has no colors, has no shapes. Then when we talk about object and subject, or object and the apprehending factor, so we can't say that one mind is the same in relation to the same thing. It's not object and subject. Or also we can't say the mind is male, female, or neuter. So the mind doesn't have these characteristics. So we usually describe the gender of a person or the sex of a person on the basis of the body. So the mind has no such fixed form. 43, in brief, the Buddhas have never seen, nor will they ever see such a mind. So not now, not in the future. So how can they see it as intrinsic nature, that which is devoid of intrinsic nature? So phenomena don't exist intrinsically, don't exist inherently. It's impossible to say there's a phenomena are devoid of such intrinsic nature. So today, let's leave it at that. I've got a few questions here. Could you please, I'd like to speak to Rinpoche. No, Rinpoche, kunzu tiwa khashishor. Tiwa tangbo dire. Da nganzo pet nima reje la chi susu sem duwa chela nyamnen chela ra. Tanda tupte namcha khandis pengido. Tupte namcha pena karsa dujin chame meba da ane chi sem chamben namcha la sowa. Di nganzo nima reje chi sem dudan la khande pengido. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Sorry, the logo, sorry, I forgot to read the question. How do you use tenets, for example, partless particles, mind only, and so forth in our daily lives to subdue the mind? So when we talk about subduing the mind, applying wisdom, so it's really wisdom. That's the main aspect that helps us to subdue the mind. There's nothing more profound than applying wisdom. So for instance, in Pramanavartika, it says, through love and compassion, they cannot really eliminate the self-grasping mind. It's only the mind that the wisdom, only the wisdom that it can reduce our self-grasping. So of course love and so forth, they can affect our afflictions, but they cannot really eliminate them. So I talked about this yesterday. For instance, we can't understand past and future lives, for instance, without wisdom. So when we really understand past and future lives, if we really think of many, many lifetimes, it really affects our mind. It really changes our attitude. So when we think about problems in this life, well, it's just one life. It becomes insignificant when we reflect upon all these other lives. So once we understand we've existed for so long, we will continue to exist, then this one life is not as important. So we won't be so obsessed with this one life, with our happiness. It seems like insignificant in many of the situations. So if we only see one life, then if we have a sense there's only one life, then if we're not successful in this life, we're desperate. We'll despair because there's only one life. That's the only chance we have. But if we reflect on other lives, it's different. Anyway, when we talk about selflessness is extremely important. So to reduce our afflictions, selflessness is so important. But there are many who disagree with selflessness. There are many philosophers. So when we say lack of intrinsic existence, so actually understanding the lack of intrinsic existence, the only way is to overcome the afflictions. But there are a lot of philosophers who say that it's impossible, that phenomena lack intrinsic existence. That's impossible. Phenomena must exist intrinsically. They must exist inherently. So the external phenomena, they must exist in that way, because the physical world, for instance, it comes together. There are many parts that form this world. So there must be some fundamental building block, something very solid and concrete we can point. Otherwise, how can this very solid world come into existence? That's their argument. They say that there must be particles, there must be these very solid objects, truly existent objects. So in the Cittamatra, in the Prasangika school, the lack of intrinsic existence is the superior. For instance, in the praise to the chewing. So in the praise to the anyway, so in this chewing device, this text called chewing device. So in this text, the Nagarjuna says that the selflessness, or the lack of intrinsic existence, that is the superior means to overcoming the afflictions. And actually understanding that there's no partless particle and so forth, then we can understand emptiness better. So that objects, there's so much we have to understand, really. You have to refute so much to really understand that phenomena don't exist inherently. That, for instance, that the objects, external objects don't exist truly, that the mind doesn't exist truly, that the mind is the self. All this needs to be refuted. If we don't refute that, we can't really fully understand this very profound concept of emptiness. These are all part of understanding emptiness. So when we say refute, so we're not saying out of attachment we're trying to refute it, but understanding, applying reasoning, understanding that inherent existence is just impossible. So all these understandings of these different philosophical tenets, these different concepts, they help us to understand emptiness. Praise to the, I forget. Okay, sorry, next question. So could Rinpoche please explain why conventional bodhicitta is a prime mind or primary mind rather than a mental factor? Tanda condition de tanda kunsu semke de semdan semjun niginane semmin suyor. Di semmin bugumzen karre. Semjun mayba semmin bugumzen karre.
Di sungorda dida.
So for instance, in the first chapter of the Abhisamaya Alankara, ornament for clear realization. So it talks about the mind having two aspirations, or two, that conventional bodhicitta is associated with two types of aspirations, and it says very clearly that it's a main mind. So papa töde, Papa Trode Arya. Sorry, I can't think of the name right now, but he's one of the commentators on the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra. So we speak of a main mind, we speak of it as a main mind because in the different commentaries, it just says that it's associated with particular aspirations. So it's, well, so actually we don't say that it's associated, something that is associated with a particular aspiration. We can't say that it's a mental factor. We don't apply this terminology in that sense, that we say a mental factor is associated with another mental factor. We always speak of something being associated with a mental factor from the point of view of being a main mind. So here we speak very clearly about the aspiration to become enlightened. That is the aspiration that the main mind, which is Bodhicitta, that it's associated with. So when we distinguish between mind and mental factors, or primary minds and mental factors, so because it just merely perceives its object from the point of view, so we distinguish between them by saying that which merely experiences its object, that which is a mere clear and knowing entity, that we describe as the primary mind. On the basis of that, then we have these different functions. So experiencing pleasure, experiencing, so receiving the mind, so having the aspect of abiding with the object, of remembering the object, distinguishing, discerning the object. So all these different functions, from the point of view of the different functions, we talk about mental factors. But so mental factors and mind and mental factors are not like different solid objects that come together. That's not what it means. So when we say, for instance, when we have like a talk, when we have like an offering to the Lama, like a offering, when we put together like a beautiful, as part of like the Lama Chepa, for instance, or the Guru Puja, you offer these different objects. So this is not what it means to have mind and mental factors, like many different objects coming together. It's just talking about it from the point of view of the function. Just these different functions are described differently. So they actually are one nature. Main mind and mental factors are one nature. So when we have a mirror, for instance, a mirror reflects objects. So it has this reflecting nature. So that is so that we're able, that objects can be reflected in this object. And then there are so these different reflections. Something yellow can be reflected, something white can be reflected, something red can be reflected in the mirror. So it has all these different aspects. So you can't really separate them from the mirror. So therefore, it is said in the scriptures that it's a main mind and it's not a mental factor. Okay, so next question. You said that based on reducing attachment, our understanding of reality will increase. How? Takandishiyore karisna kasan kesaina kinigana rumishi disons tanda chapanyundu tana ani chi ngoben netsu toyelaya chi kalora ganzo ngoben netsu totu resta dila pengre ganzo chapanyundu taya de ganzo ngoben netsu toyela pengre sti karisne di kandes pengre. The meaning here, reducing attachment, for instance, so when we have, it's not about like reducing things, like throwing something away. So it's not like pulling out hair on our head, the hair on our head, but it's rather, so here to reduce it. So when we see something as really amazing, if we exaggerate the positive qualities of something, then we become attached. So is it really true if we have attachment? For instance, we can analyze that. Does it really benefit us? So we need to analyze it. So we really need to analyze whether the way phenomena appear to us when there's attachment, is it really in accordance with reality? So it has positive aspects, it has negative aspects, so it can benefit us, it can harm us. So does it benefit us in all ways? Sometimes, of course, it benefits us, but sometimes actually it doesn't. So everything has so many different aspects. In relation to these different attributes, it can actually also harm us, a particular object. So actually, if we see the thing for what it is, then we can reduce attachment. So when we reduce attachment, then we understand how phenomena exist. So therefore, having reduced attachment, then these objects that we perceive, we can think about them. Oh, so now there's a desire to own this object, for instance, but actually, do I really need it? We are able to right away to analyze. So if we reduce the attachment, then we can apply this to other things. So we can go in accordance with reality. We can proceed based on reality. So that's the meaning. That's what I meant previously. When we reduce attachment, it helps us to understand things better. The next question, dear Rinpoche, thanks for your precious teaching. If there is no self, who can be liberated and who can reach enlightenment? 아니 rinpoche sunju tsaachimo nayala tuchina. 아니 다음에나 아니 달바 통긴디 가르레스. 담지 김바 통긴디 가르레스. 다음에나. So when we say there's no self, the meaning of that is that there's no independent self. There's no inherent self. So like this extreme kind of self. So of course there is a self that attains liberation, that experiences happiness and suffering, that accumulates positive and negative karma. So there's someone who's active, there's someone who eats, there's someone who's active, there's someone who eats, there's someone who asks questions, there's someone who answers. So the person who answers is the self. That which eats is the self. That's the I. So that's what we say is the self. This is the self that exists without analyzing it. It's merely labeled. It's merely labeled on the basis of name and consciousness, name and concepts, or conceptual mind. So it's a mere appearance. It merely appears to the mind, merely appearing or merely labeled, being mere name. So it's just labeled. That's how we say it exists. So we can say it exists because it's merely labeled. It merely appears. Therefore it exists. So being a mere existence. So it doesn't exist beyond being merely labeled, being merely designated. It doesn't exist in and of itself. That would be in contradiction. That would in contradiction to reality or in contradiction to reasoning, logical reasoning. Nothing can exist in and of itself. It's not something that's very concrete. There's nothing that you can exactly point at to say that's its actual essential existence, existing in and of itself and inherently. It doesn't exist that way. Nothing exists that way. So Lama Tsongkhapa talks about that. So he says that how do phenomena exist? How do we say? So first they have to be known by a conventional mind. So everything has to be known by the mind. It has to be known by consciousness. It has to be perceived by consciousness. That is this is the first aspect. So something that appears to all of us. So for instance, when we say the external world, this environment, our society. So this is perceived in general by mind. And there's no valid cognizer, no conventional valid cognizer that contradicts it. So what does it mean, for instance? So when we perceive a snake to be a snake, so when we see a snake body, like a snake moving, there's no other valid cognizer that contradicts this being a snake, because there is a snake. But then it's possible that we perceive a rope, for instance, a speckled rope that looks like a snake. But then another valid cognizer, conventional valid cognizer, contradicts that, in the sense that when we analyze it, we come to know that it looks that looks to be a snake, but it's not a snake. So we can analyze whether this object is a snake or not. So therefore, for it to exist, it cannot be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer, and also it cannot be contradicted by ultimate analysis. So whether when it comes to the snake, if we analyze, does it exist truly or not? Does it exist inherently or not? Well, that is contradicted by ultimate analysis. So whatever exists has to be known by a conventional mind, has to be perceived by a conventional mind. It cannot be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer, and it cannot be contradicted by ultimate analysis. So in that way, we can posit whether something exists or not. We can determine whether it's existent or not. Therefore, with regard to the self here, well, we say it doesn't exist in and of itself, but when we don't analyze, when we don't engage in ultimate analysis, then there's some conventional self. So some views, there are certain philosophies, for instance, like when we speak about certain wrong views that are intellectually acquired, that have arisen because of different philosophical views. So they also give rise to afflictions. So they give rise to afflictions. So this is the explanation you find in the text, that there are certain wrong views that create suffering, innate ones and intellectually acquired ones. Let's see. Sorry, I'll read the question first. So a reframe of question asked before or asked live. It's said that you only realize emptiness directly once you're already on the path. That is to say, the path of seeing on either the hero vehicle or the bodhisattva vehicle. Why can't you really realize emptiness first and then decide whether you want to be an arhat or bodhisattva? Why do you have to choose your vehicle first? Tanda chik kandishiyo di kasangema rumbuchele yang kandis chik shutsari de hinan tanda sebu chaya samare. Tanda kandishiyo di karisna toning usum toela ambo yana temingil lamla jugu res yana teshingil lamla jugu resra. Ta lamla shutsawa je dela lamla shutsawa je dela ani shine toning usum to tugu res. Ta mo tiwani tanda ranja res karisina tamga chego res. 다 남가 최고라. 아나 대신길람라 주 야나 태민길라 가서 대신길람라 주 야나 태민길람라 주고 디 타체 제델라 아니 시네 네람 곰긴 체나 아니 다르데다 다람나다 제 돈이 무슨 또 그랬으라. 디 남가 가리신 최고라스. 냐바로 남가 최고라스. 띵엘라 제다다 다 최고라스. Yeah, Rinpoche says he understood. So if you don't choose and just relax, no way you realize emptiness. So there's nothing to choose basically. It won't just come on its own without choosing. Why? Because it's dependent on our thoughts. It's dependent on our attitude. So when we think about things, they're different. So they actually, when we think about something, there are 4 stages. So if we don't think of the future lives, for instance, if we just think of this life, if we just think of, so this is like ordinary worldly attitude of just thinking of this life. So this is how we usually live. This is how we live our lives. We just think of this life. Or we can think of the future in the sense of, so for instance, this life, so there's more than this life. There may be a future life. So where will I be reborn? Maybe as an animal, for instance, or that may be difficult. Or I could be reborn as a preta being or a hell being. So that's possible. There's this possibility. So I'll have a lot of problems. So therefore, based on that, I have to do something. I have to engage in virtuous action so I won't be reborn in these lower realms. That is the attitude of a person of smaller spiritual aspiration. And then beyond that, if we think about this further, well, being reborn in the lower realms, yeah, that's dangerous, of course, being reborn in lower realms. But even if I'm reborn as a person, as a human being, or as a celestial being, well, I'm still under the control of the affliction. So I'll still have ignorance and attachment, aversion in my mind. But so therefore I still have a problem. So right now, okay, I'm a human being, but even as a human being, we know what it's like to be a human being as humans. So we experience it being a human. It's not easy to be a human being. It's definitely not easy to live as a human. So actually, I'm still under control of my afflictions. Therefore, I have to overcome my afflictions. That affliction, that would be that would be the kind of thought, the wish to overcome the afflictions. That is the attitude of a person of middling spiritual aspiration. And then if I don't think of others, then those people who say, well, I also think of others. I need to consider other sentient beings who are even more precious than the mother of this lifetime. So all sentient beings have been so kind, and so I need to work for the benefit of all sentient beings to help them to overcome their afflictions. So to be able to help them to do so, I need to become a Buddha. I need to become a state that is totally free from any suffering, from any afflictions, from any kind of limitations. So that is possible. So that's probably possible to become a Buddha. So I want to become a Buddha. So this aspiration, so these three aspirations, without these three aspirations, why would we work towards understanding emptiness? So selflessness, for instance. Why should I have an interest in selflessness? So why should I be interested in? So we need to think about it. Why it's beneficial, since it's beneficial or not. Does self-grasping harm me or not? So if we have self-centeredness, so we have to recognize first self-centeredness or self-grasping. Once we understand self-grasping, then we can understand that so we need to understand that the self-grasping mind is not in accordance with reality. So based on that, we understand, then having understood that it's not a correct mind, then we can continue from there to a deep understanding of selflessness. And so once we want to overcome this, we don't want this self-centered or the self-grasping mind, then if we want to be free from it, that's renunciation. And once we have renunciation, we enter a path. So it's just a natural kind of consequence of this train of thought that leads us to realizing emptiness. That are it. So there are no further questions unless you want to ask. Oh. So Rinpoche will leave it today. Is it okay that we finish class today? So that we leave it here?